Taryn Fox slapped me before the first glass of wine reached the table. For 1 second, the private suite at Monarch Crest went so quiet I could hear the ice settle in someone's drink, and every expensive smile around that room froze. My cheek burned, but my eyes went past her champagne suit and landed on Derek Whitcomb, my husband, standing close enough to stop her and still choosing not to move. Taryn's hand stayed lifted like she expected the room to thank her, and her voice carried when she said, "You do not get to walk into Derek's room and embarrass him." I stood slowly, not because I needed drama, but because sitting there would have made her version of me look true. Derek finally moved then, not toward my face, not toward the woman who had hit me, but toward the contract behind all those guests. "Don't make this worse," he murmured, and that sentence told me exactly what he was protecting. I looked at him once, then slapped Taryn back, clean and measured, and the sound cut through the suite harder than her insult had. Taryn stumbled 1 step and touched her cheek, shocked that the woman she had been taught to manage had a hand of her own. Derek's face drained, and for the first time all night, he looked less like a man hosting a renewal preview and more like a man watching the door he sold start closing. Silas Brent came in with security at his shoulder, calm enough to make Derek panic faster. "Mrs. Carver, do you want an incident report?" he asked. And Derek answered before I could, saying this should be handled privately. I kept my eyes on Silas because Derek had already answered for himself. "She made it public," I said, "and he made it useful." Silas nodded once, then told the room the Whitcomb Elite Access renewal review was suspended until footage, statements, and access logs were preserved. My job at Monarch Crest was never glamorous the way Derek liked to sell glamour. I did not hand celebrities champagne or whisper elevator codes to men who wanted to feel chosen. I was the person who decided which vendors could touch those rooms without turning luxury into liability, which meant every credential, guest path, assignment, and access list crossed my desk. Derek called it paperwork when he was annoyed, but Whitcomb Elite Access lived beyond that paperwork. His company sold the feeling that money could buy a door no one else could see. Ringside, suites, chef tables after midnight, quiet entrances behind hotels, private shuttles tourists never saw. All of it sounded like Derek's charm. What he never explained was that Monarch Crest did not let charm carry guests through employee corridors or high-limit lounges. It required clearance. And for 3 years, my signature kept his company inside the resort system he called Empire. At first, I let him have the word because marriage had made me generous until it started costing me. When Derek said he built everything on instinct, I did not mention the safety notes I revised after midnight or the vendor exceptions I refused, so his events would not collapse. Then Taryn Fox learned his rhythm. Quick with names, sharp with timing, pretty enough to make men forgive interruptions. And soon she was choosing which calls reached him and which staff member could speak. When I asked why she had a credential request beyond her role, Derek smiled like I had brought a thermometer to a party and said, "Blythe, you make the room colder than it needs to be." So I stopped asking questions where he could turn them into moods. I kept access notes, forwarded requests, guest path changes, and messages where Derek wrote that Taryn understood the flow better than compliance ever would. I was not looking for an affair that night. I was looking for the line he still knew not to cross. And by the time I walked into that renewal preview, Taryn stood on the wrong side of it. The renewal preview was already underway when I reached the suite, and Derek had dressed the room like proof of himself. Tasting plates lined the sideboard, security maps sat under linen, and guests smiled like access was part of their personality. Taryn stood beside him in a champagne suit too bright for someone carrying a tablet, touching his sleeve as she explained the private elevator route. She looked at the staff, then at me, and I watched her decide I was the only person she could move. My name card had been shifted near the service door. I picked it up, carried it back to the center seat, and sat before anyone could turn the insult into confusion. Taryn came over with that soft, public voice women use when they want the room to hear without admitting it. "This section is restricted," she breathed, "and spouses are not cleared for the access review." Derek smiled like I had misplaced myself at my own table. I looked at him first because one honest sentence from my husband could have ended it. He only adjusted his cuff and watched Taryn hold the room. So I turned to Silas Brent and kept my voice level. "Am I cleared for this room?" Silas did not blink. "You approved this room, this vendor, and every guest path attached to it." The silence changed shape. Taryn's mouth opened, then closed, and the tablet in her hand lowered like it had become heavier. Derek's smile thinned because everyone there had just heard the truth he had been trimming for years. He stepped in and told me not to embarrass him in front of guests. So I asked the question he had avoided all night. "Did you tell her why your clearance still exists?" He said nothing. Taryn heard that nothing, and it humiliated her more than any answer could have. Her face flushed as she looked from Derek to Silas, then back to me, and all the authority she had borrowed turned brittle. "You stand behind him just to pull him down," she snapped. "No," I answered. I stood behind the door he kept selling, and that was when her hand came up. After Taryn's hand came up and mine answered it, the room stopped, pretending this was a mood. Silas Brent asked for the incident report, and I asked for footage from the suite, the corridor, employee elevator, and credential checkpoint. Derek turned toward him before I finished, voice low and polished, saying this was a marital issue that did not need the resort. Silas looked at Taryn, still holding her cheek, then at my face, and answered, "Your assistant struck my access director inside my restricted suite during your renewal preview. That is a resort issue before it is your marriage." The words landed harder than Derek expected because they did not sound angry. They sounded procedural, which meant charm had nowhere to enter. Security took names from everyone close enough to hear Taryn tell me spouses were not cleared, and a supervisor collected tablets before anyone could adjust a schedule or delete a note. My phone buzzed with Greta Madsen's name, and when I stepped aside, she did not waste a breath. "Go to urgent care tonight. Blythe. Not because it is dramatic. Because tomorrow he will call it nothing if your face is not written down somewhere." Derek heard enough to go pale around the mouth. Medical records. Footage. Access logs. Witness statements. All the small, boring things he had always mocked were lining up faster than his apologies. Silas instructed security to suspend every guest-facing credential tied to Whitcomb Elite Access, including the private elevator, suite corridor, and post-event lounge escort. Derek's head snapped toward him, and for 1 second, he looked less worried about me than about the door his clients paid him to open. "You cannot freeze my access over a private argument," he said, and Silas answered, "I just did." Outside by valet, Derek tried to guide me toward his car with the careful hand he had not used inside the suite. "We are still married," he murmured, like marriage had become a key card he could swipe when every other credential failed. "You remembered that after she hit me, not before she spoke for you." His face tightened as drivers watched without turning their heads. He called Taryn before my car pulled away, not to comfort her, but to tell her not to talk. The clip hit the internet before I reached my condo. 6 seconds. Maybe 7. Taken from the far end of the suite, where the private table hid most of the truth. It showed my hand crossing Taryn's face, her stepping back, Derek moving toward me, and a room full of expensive witnesses staring like I had broken the evening apart. It did not show Taryn telling me spouses were not cleared, Silas confirming I had approved the room, or Derek asking me not to make it worse. By the time I took my earrings off, strangers had already named me for themselves. Rich resort wife hits assistant. Vegas access queen loses control. One post called Taryn a working woman humiliated by a powerful spouse. and I knew exactly why Derek had not corrected it. If people believed I had snapped first, he could ask me to fix privately what he had helped make public. June Weller called while the red mark on my cheek was still bright enough to make my bathroom mirror feel like evidence. They cut out the first hand, she said, and I told her I knew. She asked if I wanted the full footage released, but I gave Derek 1 hour to tell the truth because a clean record mattered more than a fast strike. At the 53rd minute, Whitcomb Elite Access posted a statement calling it a private misunderstanding during a high-pressure preview. That word did the final work for me. Misunderstanding was not what Taryn's hand looked like in the incident report, not what Silas had suspended, and not what every witness had just signed their name under. June released the full footage through legal communications with timestamps only. No music. No captions. No dramatic headline. The room told the story better than any sentence could. By midnight, the comments had changed direction so fast they sounded like a different crowd. VIP clients began asking Monarch Crest whether Derek still had authority over their access, and messages that once came to him warm now arrived slow, careful, and copied to legal teams. He texted, "You could have warned me before releasing that." I looked at the footage, paused on Taryn's raised hand, and answered, "I warned you before she raised it." Taryn lost her company email before sunrise. And by noon, her Monarch Crest credential no longer opened a service hallway. The apartment Derek had arranged through a vendor housing contact was placed under review, and the phone she used for client notes kept lighting up with calls she could not answer. She called Derek until the screen must have looked desperate, and when he finally picked up, his voice had already moved her outside the circle. "Talk to an attorney. Taryn." She laughed once, brittle and too sharp to be calm. "You told me she was just your wife." Derek's pause did more damage than denial. "You slapped the woman who controls our clearance," he answered, and I could hear that sentence later in Greta's office, because Taryn's lawyer provided the recording. It was not love ending on that call. It was usefulness expiring. Taryn did not become innocent because Derek abandoned her. She had still raised her hand, still tried to send me out of a room I had approved, still enjoyed the borrowed authority until it broke in public. But fear made her practical, and practical people sometimes keep better records than loyal ones. Through her lawyer, she turned over voice notes, texts, calendar edits, and messages where Derek wrote, "Keep Blythe away from the renewal walkthrough. If she starts compliance talk, redirect Silas, and handle her before she turns the room cold." Greta read the messages beside me without dressing them up. This does not prove he ordered the slap, and I do not need it to. It proves pattern, intent, and misuse of access. I looked at the words "handle her" on the page and felt the pain move somewhere deeper than my cheek. Taryn's hand had been 1 second. Derek had been building the permission for months. Then Ellis Ward, the valet supervisor, gave a statement nobody had expected. He had been near the private entrance before the preview and heard Derek tell Taryn to keep Blythe in her lane if I started asking questions. Ellis did not want attention, only accuracy, and that made him harder to dismiss. When Greta read his statement aloud, the room felt very still, because Derek had not merely watched Taryn cross the line, he had drawn it for her and pointed her toward me. Monarch Crest did not cancel Whitcomb Elite Access in a burst of emotion. That would have given Derek a story to sell. Instead, Silas Brent suspended the renewal, removed Derek from every guest-facing decision, required a neutral operations manager, and froze any access tied to Taryn's role until the conduct review closed. When Derek called it punishment, Silas answered, "Your wife did not create the risk. She documented it after you brought it into my building." That sentence traveled farther than any angry speech could have. A resort like Monarch Crest did not need to shout when it could simply stop opening doors. Whitcomb Elite Access could still exist on paper, but Derek could no longer walk clients through the private elevator, approve suite escorts, or speak to resort security as if charm were a credential. The company had to sign a new conduct addendum, return benefits tied to improper access, and accept an audit for the coming event season. Greta handled the divorce the same way, without pretending Nevada law existed to punish a bad husband for being obvious. She used the prenup, my separate condo, the preserved messages, the public statement, and the professional harm Derek tried to soften into misunderstanding. I did not ask for his company, and I did not agree to save his reputation by lying beside him one last time. He kept a limited stake, but lost the face of the business he had built around being welcomed. Taryn settled quietly after her attorney finished negotiating with the resort and Whitcomb Elite Access. She issued a formal apology, returned benefits she had no right to keep, completed a diversion program for the incident, and agreed not to describe the footage as anything other than what it showed. No one had to ruin her louder than that. The woman who thought Derek had handed her a higher room learned the room had been borrowed. The last time I saw Derek at Monarch Crest, he stood near reception with a new operations manager beside him. His old badge did nothing, and the young clerk asked if he had an appointment. No one laughed. No one needed to. Months later, Monarch Crest hosted a private dinner in the same suite where Taryn had raised her hand. It was not a gala, not a victory lap, and no one placed a microphone near my plate. The table was round, filled with security supervisors, legal coordinators, guest safety leads, beverage managers, and women who kept rooms from falling apart. I sat among them, not above them, and silence felt like rest. Silas stopped by before dessert and told us the new vendor policy had passed. Any personal relationship tied to restricted guest information had to be disclosed, and no assistant, partner, consultant, or coordinator could use credentials beyond an approved role. It sounded dry to anyone who had never watched borrowed power become a hand across someone's face. To me, it sounded like a door rebuilt with a lock that worked. Derek was in the lobby when I left, standing beside the neutral operations manager Monarch Crest now required. His old badge did nothing, and the private elevator stayed closed while a clerk asked if he had an appointment. He saw me pass with Greta and June, but I did not slow down. He was not ruined loudly. He was ordinary where he used to feel untouchable. That night, I went home to my condo above the strip and put the earrings from that night into a small box. The city below still sold power and lights, velvet ropes, and rooms people begged to enter. Inside my door, no one called my calmness cold, and no one confused my quiet with permission. If this story reminded you of a moment when someone asked you to shrink so their comfort could survive, trust what you saw. Peace sometimes begins when you stop explaining the door you had every right to close.